From about 1550 to 300 BC, the Phoenicians ruled the Mediterranean. They influenced the ancient Greeks and the Romans and traded with people as far north as Wales and throughout the continent of Africa. In spite of inhabiting a large territory, including modern-day Lebanon, very little is known about these people. But what we do know about them, though, is nothing short of amazing. Number 10. They invented the letters of the alphabet. Imagine having to write out a letter using symbols to represent words, and imagine those symbols having different meanings in each geographical area of your country. It would be fairly confusing, and communication would come to a near standstill. Thankfully, there was an incredible invention that broke words down into sounds and enabled people across the European continent to begin communicating more effectively with each other and their neighbors. It is one of the most well-known inventions of the Phoenicians, and it's of course the letters of the alphabet. Each letter was assigned a sound, and it made writing so much easier than having to paint or chisel out elaborate pictographs and symbols that represented entire words or ideas. At around 800 BC, the Greeks adopted the Phoenician alphabet, assigning mostly the same sounds to the letters, while also adding 4 new letters and sounds in order to create a 26-letter alphabet. After the Greeks had started using this new alphabet, the Etruscans and later on the Romans followed suit. The basic letters of the alphabet were easily adopted to other languages all across Europe, leading to the alphabet that we're familiar with today. Number 9. Lost writings. Although the Phoenicians invented the letters of the alphabet, very little of their writing still exists today. While historical sources mention the poets and philosophers of Phoenicia, and we know that they kept records of their finances and religious beliefs, only a very few inscriptions have survived. Ancient Greeks and Romans wrote on stone or clay tablets, preserving their ideas for future generations. The Phoenicians, though, they were influenced by the ancient Egyptians and kept their writings on papyrus and parchment. However, since Phoenicia was not hot and dry like Egypt, the ancient writings did not survive over time. Furthermore, wars and raids also had a deep impact on what would remain for future generations to uncover. Because of this great loss, much of what we know today about the Phoenicians comes to us from what other cultures have written about them. Number 8. Worshipped gods and goddesses. The Phoenicians were polytheists, and they worshipped both gods and goddesses. Their most popular deities included Baal, the father god, and Tanit, the goddess of sexuality and the mother of heaven. The goddess Tanit was unlike the goddesses we think of today. She was born a nurturing and sexual being. People turned to her when they needed help and guidance, but they also prayed to her when they wanted love or physical attention. In the minds of the Phoenicians, women could be both mothers and sexually active, and the powerful combination of the two was said to have made the Phoenician women both brave and desirable. Wherever the Phoenician people would settle, they were known to immediately begin work on building temples to their deities, making their religion a central part of their lives. For this and other reasons, the ancient deities of the Phoenicians influenced the gods and goddesses of nearby cultures, including the deities of the ancient Greeks. Number 7. They practiced magic. While little of their writing survived, 2 magic spells from the 6th century BC were discovered in Syria. What is interesting about these spells is that they are both for protection. The first spell is an exorcism that was inscribed on a pendant. 2 gods are called upon in the spell, and the invoker asks that these deities protect the wearer from flyers and stranglers. Both of these evil forces were believed to haunt the night. The second Phoenician spell was believed to protect the talisman wearer from the demon serpent. It could have been used as protection from the evil eye, and it called upon a god to strike against the serpent. Number 6. Egyptian magic symbols. Phoenicians invented many things, but they also borrowed from their neighbors and from the people that they traded with. When it came to magical amulets, they borrowed heavily from the ancient Egyptians. Many of the magic symbols found on the Phoenician amulets can be traced to ancient Egyptian symbology. Like the ancient Egyptians, Phoenician amulets also portrayed gods in their anthropomorphic and zoomorphic forms. For example, there were bodies of men fitted with the heads of dogs or lions. The Phoenicians were also fascinated by the Sphinx and made amulets and statues of this form for religious and magical purposes. Number 5. Tyrian Purple. Imagine a time when certain colors were reserved only for the wealthy and the ruling elite. If you were among the common classes, you would have been executed for wearing a color above your station. One of ancient Phoenicia's largest exports was the dye for the color purple. It was made from the secretions of a sea snail that, when exposed to the air and sunlight, underwent a chemical change and transformed into what became known as Tyrian purple. The Phoenicians themselves did not invent this purple dye. It was also discovered by the Chinese and Peruvians. However, for centuries, the Phoenicians kept the secret of how the dye was made from their neighbors and were able to make the noble classes pay an immense amount of money for this unique color. Eventually, Pliny the Elder discovered and published the method on how to make the expensive dye, and it didn't take long before ancient Rome began making its own purple dye for the emperor's wardrobe. Number 4. Masters of the slave trade. Ancient Rome might best be known for its use of slaves, but the Phoenicians were the true masters of the slave trade. First, the Phoenicians were highly skilled kidnappers. Unclaimed and unwatched women and children were often grabbed by Phoenician slave traders who traveled throughout the Mediterranean regions in search of slaves. They also kidnapped slaves from the African continent. Over time, neighboring people became extremely upset with the Phoenicians' habits of kidnapping people and selling them in slave markets. Not a big surprise there. At that point, the Phoenician slave traders made an effort to buy instead of just take slaves from other countries. Prisoners of war were almost always placed into slavery. Some of the northern tribes would sell off unwanted children. Slaves could also be cheaply bought in Egypt and sold for a higher place in other regions. People with debt, they were also often sold into slavery. There was no shortage of slaves, just as there was no shortage in the need to own them. The Phoenicians were simply the middlemen in the market, buying and selling and making the slave market one of their largest sources of income. Number 3. Unrivaled at Sea. Much of what was written about the Phoenicians points to them as being excellent merchants and seafarers. They traveled great distances to trade for raw materials such as tin to bring home and make into objects for trade in their local region. Using rudimentary forms of navigation, it is believed that the Phoenicians mostly did coastal navigation, following the coastline to various trading ports along the African and European coasts. At night, and when they were further out at sea, the Phoenicians navigated by the stars. In fact, the North Star has also been called the Phoenician Star because they used it as a point of reference while they were out at sea. Number 2. Phoenicians in the Americas. There are a growing number of historians who believe that the Phoenicians may have sailed across the seas and landed in the Americas. According to some, there is evidence of Phoenician culture among the mound builders of North America and the Olmecs of south-central Mexico. Evidence of Phoenician influence may also have been found in Iowa, Nevada, Oklahoma, Brazil, and Ecuador. When the skeleton in armor was uncovered in Fall River, Massachusetts in the 1830s, some historians felt that a Phoenician ship must have been taken off course, landed in Massachusetts, and left behind one of its deceased soldiers. There was also a rock inscription uncovered in Nevada's Massacre Lake that was believed by some to be a prayer for rain written in the Phoenician language. These, along with other archaeological oddities, have honestly just left us with more questions than answers. Number 1. Named by the Greeks. One of the most fascinating things about the Phoenicians is that we do not know with certainty what they called themselves as a group. It's the ancient Greeks who referred to them as Phoenicians, which means red men. This name may have also come from the purple dye that the Phoenicians were famous for. The Greeks called the land of the Phoenicians Phoenike, meaning blood red. It seems strange that there was this huge group of people who traveled and traded for centuries, but today there is still no record of what they named themselves. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, give us a thumbs up below. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to check out one of my other channels called Today I Found Out. You will find a link to that below. And as always, thank you for watching.